Hey guys, what's up? My name is Salamander Anagram, and in this video I'm going to be going over my newest Reaktor creation, which is called MIDI Grid. So MIDI Grid is just a MIDI generator, as the name implies, and so it doesn't create any sound on its own. It's just generating MIDI notes to be used by a synthesizer. So in this demo that I'm about to show you guys, I've just got it wired up to control the Reaktor ensemble called Prism. And after I show you guys a quick demo of this in action, I'll show you how we can wire up MIDI Grid so that it can connect to any synthesizer, not just inside Reaktor, but you can connect it to Contact or Serum or Massive or whatever. So I'm just going to hit play in the Reaktor interface here and give a quick listen, and then I'll start talking about how everything works. So you can hear there, I'm just triggering a pad sound within Prism. It's in the pads folder here. And basically what's happening is you can see we've got all of these arrows moving around in our grid space here. And whenever they hit the end of the grid, they turn around and they move back in the other direction. They also are going to trigger a MIDI note that is associated with whatever row or column that the collision happened on. So for example, this guy right here is moving up. It's going to hit that A4 note and trigger a MIDI note out immediately when we hit the play button. You see it turned on right when I hit the play button. And so these work. This group right here will be triggered whenever an arrow hits the top of our grid or the bottom of our grid, and then these ones will be triggered whenever an arrow hits the left or the right of the grid. Also, arrows can collide with each other, and that causes them to bounce off in different directions. And we've also got these little guys here, these little purple guys, which just kind of act as buffers for the arrows to bump off of and bounce around. Alright, so I'll give a more thorough explanation of how to program all of this stuff in a few minutes, but first I just want to show how we can connect this to any synthesizer, be it in Reaktor or otherwise. So I'm going to fire up Ableton Live here, and we're just going to open up a copy of Reaktor 6, and I'm going to load in our project, which is named grid.ensemble. Alright, so I don't need to do anything else with this. It's open, I've got a snapshot loaded. So when I hit play inside Ableton, we're going to see MIDI notes coming out of our MIDI activity log here. So I just want to load up a synthesizer for this to interact with, and let's use Contact. I like to use this particular MIDI generator with mallets and plucked strings and stuff. It can sound pretty good sometimes. I'm just going to load up a music box here. It's one of my favorite instruments inside Contact, even though it's fairly old now. And then we need for Contact, if I hit play now, nothing's going to happen still, because we need Contact to be receiving MIDI data from Reaktor. So if Reaktor is over here generating all this MIDI data, but it's just kind of flying off into the ether, it's not going anywhere. Nobody's looking for that particular source. So in our Contact track here, I'm going to go down towards the bottom where we've got this MIDI from option. and I'm going to select there's two drop-down menus. We're going to need to select from both of them, but let's start with the top. We're going to select the first track that has Reaktor 6 loaded here. And then again, the second drop-down menu here, we also want to choose Reaktor 6. So now Contact is set up to be receiving data from Reaktor 6. If I hit play, then Reaktor should start triggering our music box. Alright, so you can see that kind of just started off real simple as some arpeggios, and then kind of quickly just morphed out from there and started evolving. Alright, so let's hop back to Reaktor. This is the same technique that you can use, same set of steps that you can use to have MIDI Grid control anything at all that accepts MIDI. So in this case we used Contact, but it would be the exact same thing with Massive or whatever. If I load Massive into this track, I actually don't need to change anything at all because it's still just receiving MIDI from the same source and it'll automatically work. So let's hop back to Reaktor, and I just want to talk about the controls that we have available and how they're going to work. All right, so for starters, we have our grid, and to clear the grid, just choose the initialize patch from the drop-down menu here. And to add things to the grid, we can just click. To change the direction of an arrow, we can just click. To delete an arrow, we can right-click, or we can just cycle through all of the available options until the node becomes blank again. So that's how to set up our grid. If you set two arrows next to each other moving in the same direction like this, then you will create a collision. When this first arrow reaches the top here, it's going to spend a moment turning around, and when it does, this second arrow here is going to slam into it. So let's give ourselves maybe a plucked string sound or a mallet so we can hear this, what's happening a little easier than we could with a pad. Alright, so that's just going to create a very simple repeating pattern if we just use those two arrows. You can also have them collide with each other like this, so when I hit play, they're both going to step forward one and end up in the same location, and they'll start bouncing off each other. Alright, so this is some ways that you can create nodes that start bouncing off in random directions, and then that's going to create chaos that then expands outwards from there, as long as there are other active nodes within the grid to be kind of bumped out of position. All right, so on the on the left-hand side here and at the top, we have all the controls for what notes are going to be triggered when an arrow hits the edge of the grid, and so we can change the note itself, and then we can also change the octave independently of that. So each of these has two controls. The notes that are chosen are going to be selected from a scale that's selected over here. So right now I have C Ionian scale, which is another name for the C major scale. And we can actually travel through the circle of fifths by left-clicking on the root note here. So we go from C to G to D to A, and so on and so forth. And so that's the circle of fifths, which is going to allow you to make immediate changes to the key, and it's also going to allow you to make changes that make sense harmonically. So if you're not familiar with a circle of fifths, basically this is just giving us a way to translate to a nearby scale that has that's harmonically related to our current scale. You can also scroll through the different scale types. So these are all the Western modes. They're named after Greek cities, old Greek areas. And those are also set up so that as you scroll through them, each one should make minimal changes harmonically. So when we step from Ionian to Mixolydian, we're just seeing the B become flat, and as we go from there to Dorian, we see the E become flat, and so on and so forth. So these are making very incremental changes to your scale as you go through them. If we can change the whole thing up or down by an octave here. So that way, if you've got all your notes programmed and you want to try a new sound, but the sound's not quite playing at the octave you want, you can just switch the octave. You can change the speed of how fast the arrows are going to travel right here. So by default, they're going to move in eighth notes. Speed them up. You can slow them way down. Then we have length, velocity, and the amount of randomness to be added to the velocity. And the length is measured in 16th notes. So we can choose 1, 2, 4, 8, or 16 as options there. All right, so to create a quick patch, it's fairly simple. One of the ones that I have set up here was made basically using some very simple techniques. So I set up a quick arpeggio, which is a C, E, G. So it's a C major chord. And then went back down to E, C, E, G, E. And then we moved up to an F major, F, A, C, A, so another arpeggio. So I started one of the snapshots just with this very basic kind of very repetitive arpeggio pattern here that doesn't do anything. None of the arrows are colliding with each other, so it's just kind of keep repeating forever, which is boring. So what then I did was I just added one single arrow right here that's going to collide with this guy, and then everything's going to slowly devolve from there. Alright, so that's how to use MIDI Grid. Thank you guys for watching. Once again, my name is Salamander Anagram.